So, my story begins on the last day of the year as a man trudged through the snow in the Highlands of Scotland. He was shabbily dressed in a threadbare coat and worn gloves and a hat, and he walked with a slow, tired step. But as he came into a village, he stopped at the first house. It was a grand house, the house of the laird, or rather, the laird's widow. The house was the loveliest and the finest in all of the area. And the laird's widow was the richest woman in the entire area as well. The man knocked at the door, and the door was open just a crack. And a sharp faced woman looked out, saw the man, and said, "We have nothing here for beggars. Be gone." And she shut the door. The man sighed and turned and continued down the path. He stopped at the next house. It was a ways away and quite different from the first. It was just a small cottage with a single candle lit in the window. He knocked at that door, and this time the door was opened wide by a woman with rosy cheeks and three small children clinging to her skirts. Before he even had a chance to say anything, she said, "Oh, you must be so cold. Please come inside." Gratefully, the man entered the cottage, and the woman said, "We're just sitting down to supper. We don't have much, but we'd be glad to share." And so another plate was set on the worn, rough-hewn wood table, and the man shared their supper. It was a thin soup and bread, nothing more. And then the woman said, "It's dark and it's cold. You can't go back out there. You must stay the night." And she brought out a stack of blankets and fixed him a place in the corner of the main room. The next morning, he shared their breakfast, just porridge, nothing more. And again, the woman said, "You should stay here for a few more days." And the children clamored in agreement because the night before they went to sleep, the stranger had told them stories of enchantment and magical creatures. But the man shook his head and said that he needed to be on his way. And then he said, "I would like to pay you for your food and hospitality." He reached into his pocket, and the woman said, "Oh, no, no, I couldn't accept any money from you, especially not on New Year's Day." "Very well," said the man, "but I shall give you at least a token and a blessing." And he produced from his pocket a small, round, smooth white stone. He put it down on the table. And then he said, "May that which you begin continue." And then he was gone. The woman closed the door and then turned her mind to the first task of the day, which was churning butter. Now, the butter churn was already filled with cream. She had milked the cow before dawn. The cow didn't take holidays off. New Year's Day or any day, the cow needed milking, and the butter needed churning. And so she churned, and when the cream turned to butter, she scooped it out and into the waiting crocks, and then she turned back to clean the butter churn. But she found to her surprise that it seemed to be filled with more cream. And so she churned and scooped out the butter. And that's the way the whole day went. More cream, more churning, more butter, more cream, more churning, more butter, until the day was over. And the next day, the woman took all that butter into the marketplace, where she was able to trade for all the food that they needed and to sell and have money to save. Now, there wasn't another day quite like that, but it did seem that every day there was more cream and more butter than usual. And the butter was creamy and rich and sweet, and it brought a great price in the marketplace. And so gradually, bit by bit, the family became prosperous. Well, of course, people were curious, and the woman told them truthfully what had happened and said that she had no doubt that it was because of the stranger and his blessing. Of course, the others in town were envious, but no one was more envious than that rich, greedy woman, because she realized to her great chagrin that she had missed out on a blessing. And she said to herself, if I get another chance, I'll be ready. And so a year passed, and the same shabbily dressed man was once again walking into town. And the rich woman was ready. The man was not even planning to stop at that mansion, considering the non-welcome he'd received the year before. But he didn't have to stop. That woman had been watching for him and waiting for him. And as soon as he came into sight, she threw open the door and ran outside and said, "Oh, you must be so cold. Please come inside." And she practically shoved him into her house. She said, "Oh, I'm just sitting down to supper. Please join me." And she led him to a table that was overflowing with tureens and plates and platters of the richest, finest food available. When supper was over, she showed him to a guest room with a beautiful bed piled high with soft, fine woolen blankets and down pillows. The next morning, breakfast was no less sumptuous than the supper had been the night before. And then the man prepared to leave. Before he had a chance to say anything, though, the rich woman said, "In case you're thinking of paying me for the food and lodging, I simply couldn't accept any payment. Although, if you had a small token and a blessing, I might be persuaded to accept that." "Very well," said the man. And he reached into his pocket and pulled out a smooth, round, white stone and put it down on the table. And then he said, "And a blessing?" She said, "Yes, a blessing." "Ah," he said, "well then, may that which you begin continue." Well, now she had what she had been hoping for and counting on, and she practically shoved him out the door. "Bye." She shut the door and sighed with great satisfaction, because she knew she'd been planning on exactly what she was going to do. She went into the drawing room, and there on the table, she had laid out very carefully 3 gold coins and a large, large silver box. What she planned to do was to spend the entire day counting the coins and putting them into the silver box. And she figured that by the end of the day, that box would be full of gold and she would be amazingly, incredibly, surpassingly rich. And so she settled herself in the chair and she looked at the 3 gold coins and the silver box. She picked up one of the coins and she raised the lid on the box, but the silver seemed to be tarnished. "Well, this will never do for my gold," she said to herself. And so she picked up a rag and began to polish the silver. And when she had polished away all of the tarnish, she set down the rag and picked up the gold coin. But when she looked back at the silver box, it seemed to still be tarnished. So she picked up the rag again and rubbed and polished and rubbed and polished and rubbed and polished. And well, that's what she did all day. She rubbed and polished that silver box. And at the end of the day, she still had the 3 gold coins. And the box was very, very, very shiny. And so it was that the cheerful, generous woman was happy. She had prospered in the weeks and months and years that had followed her visit with the old man. And every day, her churning produced more and finer butter than she had ever produced before. It was rich and sweet and creamy and much, much in demand in the marketplace. And as for the rich, greedy woman, well, at the end of the year, she was still rich. She'd never had to spend an entire day polishing again, though in the weeks and months that passed, every now and again she would feel an overwhelming and inexplicable urge to pick up a rag and start to polish. And so at the end of the year, she was still rich. She had those 3 gold coins that she'd set out, they were still there on the table. And was she happy? Well, I can't tell you if she was happy or not, but I can tell you this, that the people in town always said that that woman's silver was always very, very, very shiny. And so, as we begin a new year, I think it's a good idea to consider very carefully what we are going to do with the days that are coming for us. Because what we begin will likely continue to our bitter regret and disappointment, or I hope, to our great satisfaction and joy. And that is the story of New Year's luck.